Thanks for joining us on the program, everyone. A showdown is brewing at the heart of Nigeria's economy. NUPENG, backed by the NLC, has declared an indefinite nationwide strike, accusing Africa's richest man, Aliko Dangote, of anti-union practices. There are issues of low wages and monopolistic tendencies at his multi-billion-dollar refinery. The allegations are stark. Workers barred from joining NUPENG, forced into what the union calls a management-sponsored association, wages far below industry standards, and labor rights allegedly trampled in defiance of Nigeria's constitution and international law. With fears that queues may return to petrol stations and a national shutdown, the Minister of Labour has waded in, summoning both sides to the table. But beyond the meeting rooms in Abuja, the bigger questions remain: is Dangote above the law? Are workers being silenced? Or is organized labor playing politics with Nigeria's most strategic private investment? We'll be talking to a public affairs analyst who knows more on the show today. But let's bring you some updates as regards what we're covering on this story.
In the early hours of Monday, normal activities were observed, but for junior workers in the oil and gas sector, the reverse was the case. Tanker drivers parked their trucks and were seen taking quick nap or wearing long faces, worried about the future. The leadership of the Nigeria Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas Workers NUPENG initiated an indefinite strike over alleged unlawful and anti-union practice by business mogul Aliko Dangote and his cousin Aliu Dangote. In a signed statement, the union claimed that Dangote's company MRS recently started recruiting drivers for its newly imported compressed natural gas CNG trucks, but they reportedly compelled applicants to sign an agreement not to join any of the existing unions in the oil and gas sector.
It's not supposed to be. What about all this depot that they have already built? How many billions? So definitely you want to render them useless. What about all people that are working in the depot? What is going to happen to them? What about the driver that was around here too? What are we going to be doing? Look at all our truck around here now. There is no one working out of them because of Dangote this thing. Yes. So we cannot bear that. Yes. We agree for him to build the refinery as it was. But for this country and the new truck that it's bringing, it's not working.
Dangote wants to create a monopoly. And monopolies tend to stifle and strangulate other businesses from growing. People have invested a lot of money because if only Dangote keeps loading at his gantry, other depots will be rendered redundant, which is not supposed to be. What about other people who have invested their money to create depots? Jobs and employment would definitely will be lost. So now he's trying to say that once his drivers, they must sign an undertaking that when they are employed, they are not going to join any union. That is to say, he wants to trample on the rights of we drivers.
The federal government is set to meet with the union and other interested parties to determine the next line of action.
Ministers have warned that if this impasse is not resolved swiftly, the transportation sector, power and manufacturing sector may grind to a halt, which will further deepen inflation crisis across the country. Sharon Ijason, TVC News.
And joining me now to discuss the Dangote NUPENG face-off is public affairs analyst Ayodele Adio. Thank you for joining us on Beyond the Headlines.
Thank you for having me.
So NUPENG says Dangote refinery is forcing drivers into what they call management-created group, the so-called Direct Trucking Company Drivers Association, instead of the legally organized one. Let's begin from there. What do you make of these allegations, which they say violates Section 40 of the Constitution and even ILO conventions on freedom of association?
Well, first, I'm not clear on who is violating the Constitution here, because Section 40 of the Constitution that you have just rightfully alluded to guarantees freedom of association from every Nigerian across the country, whether it's religious, political, or social, cultural. Any Nigerian can, be a part of a group as long as it's lawful and it's not injurious to his or her neighbor. Now, to the extent that the claims by NUPENG that, people are being compelled to join an organization within Dangote and other, I think it was MRS that they were also laying claims about.
That's right.
It's neither here nor there, because there is not a single staff from any of these organizations that have come out to say that they were compelled to join any organization, otherwise they were going to lose their jobs. Now, if that allegation had been raised by a staff or somebody who lost his or her job for refusing to join any so-called union within the Dangote group, then we can have a basis upon which we'll be making these arguments.
In reality, how easy would it be for an employee to come out publicly to say, my employer is not allowing me to associate? I mean, you probably wouldn't say that if you don't, for fear of not losing your job.
Well, the truth is, I'm not really, again, for us to make an allegation, or for any group, to make an allegation, you need to have evidence upon which your allegations are based. So if you can't find anybody who says I'm being compelled to do this, then you're really standing on spaghetti legs.
The union is saying that DTCDA is a drivers' union, is what they call Management Inspired Association. There are conversations about who signed its registration details. They've pointed fingers to Enoch Kanawa's role and connection to Dangote or MRS. I'm sure you've heard human rights lawyer Femi Falana also arguing that Dangote's anti-union policy contravenes the provision of the law that we've just talked about. Shouldn't this be a conversation that Dangote is willing to have and to clear, because we hardly hear from them when issues like this happen?
Well, you might have to take it up with them, really and truly, and get clarity on that regard. But again, it's like people are making arguments from two sides of the coin. On the one hand, NUPENG is saying people are being forced to join some sort of a union which flagrantly disregards the Constitution. But they, on the other hand, are also demanding that these drivers join their own union, which again contradicts the position that they are holding ab initio. So, I mean, I think that really and truly all of these debate, is completely needless, especially because the sector has been completely deregulated and a private sector actor has taken decisions upon which he wants to consolidate his market share and has no reason whatsoever to answer to anybody in pursuit of his own strategy to expand his own market share. Now, the question then you have to ask, obviously, is what NUPENG, on the other hand, will be doing with its members. Now, first of all, there are three issues at play here. First of all, NUPENG have positioned as if, they have been serving Nigerians for 40 years, if you'd like. And the reason they're going on strike is to defend the position of Nigerians. I'm not sure that there's a single Nigerian on the street today whose interest will be served by petrol tankers not working for the next 3-4 days, where there will be a complete halt, especially of market activities around the petroleum products, which will obviously make it difficult for people to get the product. So I'm not sure how that serves your interest or serves my own interest. The second thing here is there was a Business Day report in 2020 that clearly, a report that indicted the Petroleum Equalization Fund, which was to stabilize petroleum prices across the country. The report showed that only petrol prices in Abuja and in Lagos were stabilized, and 940 billion naira went to complete waste. DataFight, the data analysis organization, did another report that between 2012 and 2015, 454 billion naira cannot be accounted for in the Petroleum Equalization Fund. So we're talking about 1.4 trillion now that were unaccounted for between the space of maybe 4 or 5 years. Now, these were funds that were supposed to go into the pockets of Nigerians because, once fuel prices are stabilized across the country, you don't have to pay more for petrol in Enugu than you would in Lagos. But unfortunately, over 1 trillion could not be accounted for, and those funds went to a complete waste. So the reality is that the organization was never efficient. It ran a near monopoly in this country, and they held us by the jugular for so many years. And while I understand, and again, I think it's also important because we're living in an economy where it's struggling to create jobs. And for 15 to 20,000 people to lose their jobs, for me, is a huge problem for the economy. But what should have happened is that the government that pursued a deregulation policy should have also engaged a transition program, especially for players in the sector whose positions might be threatened by private sector investment in that particular sector, and mitigated the amount of job loss in that sector. The truth is, it's not the responsibility of the private sector investor to protect the interest of these workers. It's the government who has pursued some sort of a deregulation policy that is definitely going to leave certain people outside the cold. And they should have planned for that.
There has to be rules and regulations that players like Dangote, play by, except we're saying it's bigger than the road. The Dangote refinery has had its fine share of beautiful PR. It's been hailed as patriotic, game-changing investment, no doubt, to end our dependence on imported fuel. But if there are allegations of denying workers' rights, that is threatening a national strike,
yes,
and the Nigerians haven't forgotten what happens when the queues return.
Yes.
I don't think it aligns with that organization's vision. What do you make of those who are saying they need to address this head-on?
Well, the truth is, again, I'm going back to the initial point. Not a single worker from the Dangote industries or refineries or whatever you call it has made any clear allegation that his right
NLC speak for the workers. They necessarily don't have to come personally to say.
No. NUPENG is speaking.
NUPENG
is speaking for their people, and their drivers were rendering a service for the refinery. Let's make that very clear. Their drivers were rendering a service to the refinery. They are not speaking for the staff of Dangote refineries, right? The staff of Dangote now will be the people that they are likely to employ to drive the CNG trucks that, from the news reports would have arrived, I think, yesterday or in a few days from now. Those will be the primary responsibility of the organization. Now, until those people come out to say that their rights are being trampled upon, or accept that there's an investigative report from a credible media organization that says that this organization...
You're saying you don't believe NUPENG?
How can they know when it's not their staff in question?
They are likely going to know more than you. That's the point I'm making.
No,
because
I do not
to an extent, they represent the labor force.
See, again, that's why I say we're confusing two things. They have a right to fight for their members.
Because, for instance, now, the union claims that Dangote refinery pays among the lowest wages in the oil and gas sector.
To who?
Treating its staff beneath acceptable standards.
Well, again, you see, when you talk about wages and salaries, I think, you can take that up with the HR of the organization, and those allegations, I can prove that. I don't speak for Dangote, refineries. But I'm settling on the crust of the issue here, which is, it's important to separate the two issues, which is one, NUPENG has a right to speak for its members. But we must also clarify that the people that NUPENG are speaking for are not the staff of Dangote, and Dangote are not directly responsible for these people. And while I understand that these people are likely, because it's not even a guarantee that they are going to lose their jobs, because petrol importation has continued in this country, even though some of us have vehemently in the last 18 months been strongly opposed to the reckless importation of petrol, which I believe sabotages, the local content, in itself. But be that as it may, assuming without conceding that thousands of drivers are going to lose their jobs, my argument is this, that it's not the responsibility of the private sector actor to absorb these people. I'm not sure that, TVC, when it came with its brilliant broadcasting network, decided to absorb people from NT and pity them from bleeding when viewership was shifting to private sector network. It's not your job to do that. It's the job of those responsible for NUPENG to anticipate that there is a deregulation in the sector and to predict through, long-term analysis that certain jobs will be threatened in the mid to the long term. And how do we transition?
Yes.
And that really is their responsibility to do. And I must add that I listened to the interview of one of their senior members, I'm not sure his portfolio, who alluded to the fact that they are training their drivers to acquire new skills and stuff like that for them to transition. I believe that that's coming on the 8th day of the week, and things like that should have happened.
What labor leaders are also accusing Dangote of is trying to dominate not just refining,
yes.
But also trucking and distribution. And according to them, they're saying it's creating what they call a monolithic agenda. I'm wondering how you view, the position of critics who say this is less about free enterprise,
yes,
and more about stifling the competition.
Well, again, you have to look at it, from a broad, from a broad view, or some sort of a helicopter view. Now, if you look at various fast-moving consumer goods organizations, some of them in beverage, some of them who sell biscuits and what have you, the most successful of these organizations are those who are able to control their distribution chain, where they are not held by the jugular by a third-party actor that stops the efficiency by which they can distribute their products across the country and regionally. So every sensible manufacturer anywhere in the world takes logistics very seriously, because his company lives or dies based on how strong their logistics and distribution is. So what he has done, like I said, is a clear market consolidation strategy to ensure that he locks in the market, especially with partner petrol stations across the country. Because what happens is that many of these petrol stations will no longer have to deal with the hassle of trying to move their trucks from Maiduguri or from Sokoto down to Lagos to lift a product and bring back to their petrol station to sell. So in other words, he has solved what the market, the Petroleum Equalization Fund was supposed to do, which was supposed to equalize petroleum prices across the country, where I have just said to you that there are credible reports that showed in just a space of 5 years, 1.43 trillion was lost. And he's going to do that and absorb that entire cost. And so retailers also across the country are going to see higher margins, and the end user, people who buy petrol in many parts of this country, are going to pay about the same rates that you pay in Lagos, which means that there are going to be savings for consumers in places like Kaduna, in Kano, in Sokoto, in Enugu, that typically had paid higher prices before now. So for the consumer, it's a big win. For the retailers, it's even a bigger win. I understand, again, let me say this, that for competition, it can be hellish, because the approach that the Dangote refineries has taken is one that clearly raises the bar for the competition, to try to match. But we have to tell ourselves the truth. That was what we were getting into when we deregulated the sector, when we issued out licenses for people to come and invest. A lot of people didn't have the courage to bite the bullet. He took the pain to do it. And these were predictable down the road. So if you read the PIA Act that governs the regulatory framework of that industry, he's not in violation in any of the provisions. So legally speaking, he's within the context of the law. So what we're discussing, and that's what I believe that our conversation should be narrowed around, is how we are going to protect, or provide alternative if that need arises, because I'm still debating the fact that the need for that hasn't arisen yet. But should that need arise, the question we need to ask is, how do we make investments available to provide safety nets for these truck drivers that may be potentially out of job, should this initiative kick off?
But we have fish to fry now. The strike is expected to disrupt supply chains. There are fears that it might even deepen inflation and hardship. What responsibility do you see the key players, have? What responsibility do they have? We understand that the minister has called both of them to the table. What must they do now? Because time is ticking.
So again, for me, I think this is a conversation that should be held between the federal government, the Minister of Petroleum, NUPENG, perhaps the chairman of the NNPC and the GMD of the NNPC, to sort of find a short to mid-term stopgap framework for many of the drivers that they claim will be left out in the cold. I would imagine, if you asked me, I would imagine that one of the things that can happen is to say, Alaji, if you're going to hire 20,000 drivers, we need to come to the table and agree that if you have a standard of the kind of drivers that you're looking for, we will train these drivers to meet that standard, to be able to absorb them into your organization so that they can earn salaries, have health insurance and cover, as it were. And we'll think about what we'll do with the other 5,000. left behind. That's the kind of deal, if I were on the side of the NUPENG, that I'll be looking to strike. To say that, listen, you would have to take 5,000 to 10,000 of our people, train them if you may, to meet the high bar of the drivers that you want to drive, so that we don't leave these people in the cold. And then we can think about what we can do with these other 5,000 to reabsorb them in various other sectors so that they can still have, reasonable income to feed their families. You don't want an economy that is bleeding 20,000 jobs. You don't want that to happen. But I'm saying that that is the responsibility of the government and the people in that sector to think out of the box, to create a situation that absorbs these people and not leave them out in the cold. Is that responsibility on the private sector, I think, is going to breach too far. Is that a deal you think they can strike this week? I mean, I'm looking at a short-term solution to what appears a problem that can ripple. I have no doubt the ripple effect can impact quite a number of Nigerians. Again, that's why I believe that NUPENG should not put themselves in a position where they lose the goodwill that many Nigerians have towards them. Because if you put hardship on millions of Nigerians, that goodwill will dissipate. And a lot of people could care less what happens to them afterwards. In fact, the reality is that people will even start to pray for those CNG trucks to come on the road so that they can no longer be hijacked by a union. And that's the reality. So to your second question, I think that deal can be done if all actors are acting in good faith. There's no reason why such a deal cannot happen, especially when there are trade-offs to be made. So for me, I think I want to see better negotiations on the side of NUPENG. I like to see a lot more action and movement from the federal government, who had already seen that this sector was going to be deregulated, to see how they can provide safety nets for these hardworking Nigerians. A good place to leave it. Hopefully we won't have to return to this conversation again. I hope so. Ayodele Adio, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for having me. Well, whatever the outcome, millions of Nigerians will feel the pain if fuel supplies are interrupted. Today is a chance for Dangote Group and Labour to show that industrial progress and workers' rights can actually coexist. All the nation will pay the price. We'll keep tracking the reconciliation or the conciliation from the Ministry of Labour and bring you developments and updates as we have them. That's our show today. Remember, you can watch it again at midnight and 6 a.m. tomorrow. I am Nifemi Oguntoye.